Welcome to Catholic Champion. I'm your host, John Yep, and my co-host, Michael Hichborn. Today on Catholic Champion, we got a champion, Dr. Christopher Manion, who is just fresh off from writing an amazing book, Charity for Sale, which is the perfect time in this country for this book. And we get to have the author right here among us, and we're going to talk all about it. Stay tuned. Dr. Christopher Manion, for those of you who do not know him, you should, especially if you get the Wander, because he writes for that excellent newspaper on a weekly basis. But Doctor, we're grateful you're here with us. Your bio, for those who are unfamiliar with what you've done in your life, you earned a PhD in government from the University of Notre Dame. Yes, they lost a national championship. I share that grief. You've taught at Boston University, Catholic University, and Christendom College. You have written extensively for numerous publications, including Wall Street Journal, Human Life Review, and National Review. You're co-founder of American Foreign Policy Council, and you've lived and traveled frequently in Latin America. Your Spanish is actually decent and amazing, and served as staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere during the Ronald Reagan administration. Last and not least, you're a Knight of Malta, and you're married with a beautiful family, and you live in the gorgeous Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Mm-hmm. Dr. Manion, thanks for coming and joining us today on the show.
Thank you, fellas.
All right, so getting right into it. Obviously I've known you for a long time, and Michael Hichborn, and we've all kind of been friends for a while now. And it was like about a year and a half ago that, or whatever it's where we started talking about what's on your on the horizon. And I don't know who proposed it, but the idea of this book came out, and you had it in the back of your mind. As you say, you've been writing it since 1971, I believe. And, we kind of just, struck a deal and said, let's do this. Let's get this to the print. Well, anyone who's written books knows that sometimes it just takes time. It takes time to do it well. And, but God knows the moment for the books to be published. And God knew precisely this in February of 2025 would be the best moment. So we present to you Dr. Manion and the book Charity for Sale, which is a Catholics for Catholics publication. It's available for pre-order right now. And we're going to get into all the nuts and bolts of this a really incredible book and just how it relates to the present crisis. Michael, you've had a chance to read this book too. You got a copy in advance. What were your initial thoughts here as we begin this conversation with Dr. Manion?
Well, as I was going through the book, the thing that really struck me the most was how everything suddenly made a whole lot more sense. I've been doing my research on Catholic charities, on Catholic Campaign for Human Development, Catholic Relief Services, and all that stuff for about 15 years. And, I started off as I was reading, doing my research going, gosh, the bishops just don't know what's going on. I've got to do something. I got to let them know. And blink, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and really ready to help the bishops to understand how these people are undermining them and sapping their authority. And then when I got the pushback from the bishops with what I was researching, I didn't quite understand what hit me. But as I was reading Dr. Manion's book, what struck me was how not just the bishops have been shaped, but how the Catholic Church has been shaped in the United States throughout the last 100 years in its relationship with the government, and the way that it views money, and the way that the bishops view themselves as CEOs in their diocese instead of shepherds leading souls to Christ. And that shift in ideology with regard to the relationship in politics translated into a redefining of charity. And what Dr. Manion wrote, I think, is a masterwork in explaining how that happened.
Here's the preamble to the book, and then I'll let Dr. Manion, take the floor here. In the 19th century, the Catholic Church in America received no government funding, and the faith was spreading like a prairie fire. Today, Catholic bishops, as Michael knows well too, have received over $1 billion a year in taxpayer funding. Your money, our money. But the churches are closing, millions have left the pews, and scandals continue to plague our chanceries. So how do we get here? This book traces the journey of Catholic charity from a hallmark of religious freedom to a secular subsidiary of the federal government. It begins with the historic leadership of James Cardinal Gibbons, the Primate of America back in the late 19th century, champion of military charity, founder of today's Conference of Catholic Bishops, and a firm opponent of government financial support. Interesting. So the founder of the USCCB was against that. Then describes the conference's support of the Democrat Party through the 20th century and the events that led to the flashpoint in the 1960s, the sexual revolution, Humanae Vitae, and the collapse of the conference's teaching on sexual morality and the family that followed. Notre Dame played a key role in that decline, trading its Catholic identity for an elite but secular status. Other universities quickly followed, and the Bishops' Conference went along. Generous taxpayer support, silence on the church's magisterial teaching, and the rise of social justice as a convenient substitute for the magisterium. And then a final consideration of the scandals and the rise of mass immigration as the bishops' new preeminent political issue, as we see them now as they defend this at the across media platforms right now. Leaves us with the challenge of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who's really a saint. It's up to the lady. So that's the book. Okay, Dr. Manion, when did you first think about writing this book, and what motivated you to do so?
Well, when you and I spoke over a year ago now, we were chatting like we are here today about the general pulse and temperature of the times, including the church. And as we got deeper and deeper, you said, well, how did we get here? How did it come to this? Because I'm an old guy, and you young fellows have a tremendous, a voracious appetite for learning about the past. Pre-Woodstock, I call it, pre-Vatican II. And my father had been at Catholic U with Cardinal Gibbons. Cardinal Gibbons brought him there in 1915. And as I dug and dug, I thought, wait a minute, we got here on a long trail. What Cardinal Gibbons and his generation did really set the course of history for the next 150 years. And as we've seen just recently, the history of that of the church goes back as far as 1848, when the Irish got off the boat in Boston and were met by the bishop and by the Democrat Party. And RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and just the month before the election, said, I've been a Democrat since my great-great-grandfather, and I've left the party because the party left me. Now, my father died a Democrat in 1979, but the party was pro-life right through the 1960s. In fact, the earliest members of the pro-life movement were largely human rights advocates. And those human rights, of course, were children, parents, across the board. And then along came the sexual revolution and Humanae Vitae. The collision between the Humanae Vitae spirit and the sexual revolution was fatal. Humanae Vitae was buried. Cardinal Dolan in 2016, no, in 2012, Cardinal Dolan said, we've had laryngitis about these issues for years, family issues, children issues. And with that, the church had to make a turn to social justice. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we've just flourished with the social justice. And I put that in quotes because social justice is a relatively new concept in theology and in Catholic social teaching, but it isn't necessarily the Democrat Party platform.
There's a Barry Lee that you mentioned right early on. Your father knew Cardinal Gibbons, right? In some ways, in a lot of ways, you're like the perfect person to write this topic because of your family history going back to the origins of the conference, and also because of your ties to the University of Notre Dame, where, as you third part of the book, where you really go into how that really plays just a pivotal role. So, I mean, do you see it is all coming like full circle? Your dad's probably been encouraging you to write this book and kind of share with us youngins, as you say, appreciate that, as I'm 40 years old, to write this book and tell the story to present day Catholics. We're all waking up now as we see this immigration crisis. Like, what the heck? How did we get here? This book tells why.
Well, thank you for that reference, because Dad was the youngest of 9, born in 1896. And he was the first in his class at a little Catholic high school in Henderson, Kentucky on the Ohio River. Got a scholarship to a local college, St. Mary's. And from there, he got a scholarship, a Knights of Columbus scholarship to the Catholic University of America. And he got to Catholic U knowing that Cardinal Gibbons had raised the money to fund that scholarship. So when on a winter day, Dad was really upset because he knew we were going to go into World War I. This was December 2016, January 17. And he meets this priest who is so friendly and says, "What's the matter, young man? You don't look happy. You've got to read your Gibbons. You've got to have great expectations." And only when they parted did Dad introduce himself and find out he was talking to the primate of America. And he told me that he was 19 when that happened. And he told me that when I was a junior at Notre Dame at age 20, and he broke into tears. So that trail of tears and his love for the church, he was dean of the law school at Notre Dame for 30 years. And I grew up baptized at Notre Dame and got my degrees at Notre Dame, while 2 stories above me in the Hesburgh Library, this entire series of conversions from Catholic truth to Eastern elite identity was going on. I knew the characters, Father Hesburgh, I'd known since I was 3, but I didn't know the flow until I started digging. About 2010, Carl Anderson, at the time, the head of the Knights of Columbus, the Supreme Knight, had been my suite mate at Jesse Helms's office during the 1980s. He was very helpful. I started digging into the archives, and I'll tell you, there could be a book written for every page of what I've described in my work. After all, here's a book on love. Chris, you're writing a book on love. How long is it?
Right. One of the things that you mentioned early on, you talked about how the Democrat Party was actually pro-life all the way up until the 1960s. One of the things that I had done as a researcher when I was at American Life League 15 years ago, I was looking into Father Robert Drinan, who died some time ago. But Father Drinan, I remember watching a 60 Minutes interview back at, I think it was 1968 or 69. And it was all about secret abortions in America and the whole question of whether abortion should be legalized or not legalized in the United States. And they followed some young women around. But Father Drinan at that time towed the absolute church line on abortion. Wow. And he said, look, abortion is a sin. We can never support abortion, et cetera, et cetera. But then Father Drinan, as you know, was elected to Congress against canon law. And he was one of the most radical pro-abortion congressmen in his time. And in fact, he led a bunch of Catholics to support the pro-abortion
Mhm.
position at that time. So tell us a little bit about Father Drinan's influence on the Catholic Democrats. Tell us a little bit about that. I know that you're familiar with it from your time uh, in the working in the State Department.
I didn't work for the State Department,
Or
but I was with the Foreign Relations Committee. But I always said
of course.
I worked for Jesse Helms. I was pro-life. When I came to Washington, I worked for Michael Novak and then Jesse Helms. And when I left Jesse Helms, I left town. And of course, I wasn't making any inroads anywhere else, but interestingly, they were scared to death of Jesse Helms because he was not able to be bought.
Interesting.
And most people go to DC to get bought big time. Now, back to Father Drinan. Father Paul Mankowski's book tells about Drinan and his superior general who forbade Drinan to run for Congress, but the provincial defied the superior general and allowed Drinan to run. And all those records are now in a book that Phil Lawler edited on Father Mankowski, another South Bender like me, wonderful Jesuit who died too young and a brilliant man. He taught pre-Semitic languages in Rome. But Father Drinan was in Congress when my wife's father, John Schmitz, was in Congress. And John Schmitz was the most pro-life member of Congress in 1968, 69, 70, in that era. And he and Drinan collided constantly because Drinan was already into the pro-abortion camp. But I think at that time also you have to, the historical track record is fascinating. After World War II, a lot of leaders in the world wanted peace, not war. They knew that Wilson's The War to End All Wars had flopped and brought on a bigger one. But they thought that one cause of war was the willingness to want more land, Lebensraum, the Germans called it, to expand the borders of their countries. Well, that was going to lead to more wars because borders mean wars, as we've learned in the past few years on our own border. So Drinan was taking advantage of a wave of bipartisan support. The best way to express it would be the population bomb, Paul Ehrlich's book, which came out in 1968. We're all going to be starving by 1990, he said, unless we stop having babies. And that notion of population bomb put together Republicans and Democrats. George H.W. Bush, they had a nickname for him on the floor that was unkindly, but he was a sharp, strong advocate of population control. Not just Democrats, Republicans and Democrats together wanted to stop population growth to prevent war. And many people didn't look beyond the surface of that argument and realize what that meant. However, John F. Kennedy established AID, the Agency for International Development, in 1962. And from the beginning, AID's preeminent issue was population control. It always has been. We have learned that in the Senate. When I was, I didn't know about all these other falderall contracts AID had. I was constantly in touch with Latin American bishops, whom, by the way, the State Department hardly knew. I did. I stopped and saw every one of them I could during my visits down there over the years, 1971 to 1992. And they were wondering, what are your American bishops doing supporting these programs down here that are taking, they won't give us clean water, they won't give us agricultural subsistence unless we embrace family planning as a required part of every single grant.
Yep.
And that's when I started digging, if you will, even deeper. And it was not a pleasant aroma that rose from the ground I dug.
Yeah.
Going from the almost 10,000-foot level, just looking at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So you write that the origins of it from Cardinal Gibbons were noble, at least, and he was a big proponent that it would exist without federal funding, right? So what point would you say that shifted? And prior to that shift, was it fulfilling what, a good cause? I mean, is there a value right now for the Conference of Catholic Bishops? And what does that actually look like?
Well, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, first of all, has no official status. Bishops pointed that out while the charter for the protection of young people, children and young people, and as we learned later, bishops, was adopted in 2002. But the conference was the outflow of, like every bureaucracy in history, war. When the war was finally declared in March 1917, Catholics who had been unpopular with many of the sects, Protestant sects that ruled the United States in those days, 8 states in 1810 or 20, 8 states had state religions. John Jay, the Supreme Court, first Supreme Court Chief Justice, Catholic from New York, couldn't even hold office in New York.
Wow.
Until 1908, until 1818. You're thinking back that far, and the Catholic Conference was formed as a war council to help those Catholics on the East Coast. There was only one theater, the Atlantic Theater, to help those Catholics congregating from all the states on the East Coast in training camps going east to war. So the Catholics, the Knights of Columbus, established camps all the way along the coast. At every training camp, they had a tent or a cabin. And Carl Anderson told me about this back in 2010. Everyone welcome, everything free. And guess who was the coordinating Knight of Columbus with the Army? And then after he joined the Army as a captain, the coordinating Army officer with those camps, Clarence Manion, my father.
Wow.
And so, believe me, it gives me chills just to remember the magnitude of the desire of Catholics in general to be accepted. They were afraid of being called papists and traitors. And Cardinal Gibbons was very aware of this himself. I'm sure that that knowledge, I can't judge feelings, but I know that was, he wanted to make sure that we were good citizens. And good citizens, as he gave in talk after talk in 17 and 18, support the country. We're loyal to the church and we're loyal to our country. So when that Catholic War Council met to help families of those soldiers who had already been sent abroad, they left families behind. And Woodrow Wilson was pretty tough on anybody who didn't want to go. The War Council did its job. More Catholics per capita served in the World War I than any other religion. And that was an embrace, if you will, of the American patriot and the Catholic harmony. After the war was over, they said, well, gee, we have this wonderful office. How can we let it close? How many times have you heard that?
Yep. Yep.
I think it was Milton Friedman who said that the only thing we have in this life, close to eternal life, is a government agency.
Yes. I'd like to kind of get to the very heart of the question of charity, because one of the things that you're pointing out, you're pointing out that Catholics are very patriotic at heart. They have a strong understanding of patriotism because they understand a patrimony. They understand what it means to have a fatherhood, because we have priests, we have bishops, we have a pope, we have this hierarchy that we just naturally understand. We're very militant in that respect. But Catholics are also very generous. They're very giving. They have a strong desire to help people wherever they can. And it just comes from the natural grace of the faith that we hold. But where does charity get transitioned to kind of an industrial idea? And how did that shift take place?
Well, I just recall a speech on the floor the other day, and also an interview with now Secretary of State Rubio. He was challenged. Well, you're closing down AID. Do you want America to continue to be the most generous country in the world? Well, of course, we were generous long before there was AID. We went and rebuilt the Forstall plan and everything else that helped Europe and all the rest. And there were a lot of non-governmental organizations. That is to say, it wasn't government. Catholics and charities have flourished when they're independent. But one of the conclusions that I drew from writing this book is that we really need to think twice about taking government money at all. When you ask, when did that transition take place? I think that there were key moments. The New Deal. Father John Ryan, who was the first and very effective spokesman for what is today the U.S. Catholic Bishops Conference, was a soft socialist, if you will. And that was fine, because priests can have varieties of opinions. And in those days, bishops did. A lot of bishops didn't like Ryan because he was beating the drum. And in fact, their first pastoral in 1919 had been written by Ryan, but he wrote his sister later, "I'm really glad they didn't put my name on it because they know I'm a leftist." But that's been the trend ever since. You have FDR. Ryan gave speeches for FDR at the Democrat National Congress in the name of the Catholic Church. And the elections of 1936 and 1944, the bishops were 100% behind the New Deal and the welfare state which it had inaugurated. However, it was only with LBJ when the issue arose that, gosh, if we aren't religious, we can get government money, because it was still against the law to fund religion with the distinction. The separation of church and state, in my view, is just no thanks. But there is a distinction. And when that money became available in 1967, Notre Dame changed its board of trustees to a lay board so John D. Rockefeller's influence could introduce them to the East Coast and make a lot of money. And they do, no doubt about it. And 68, Humani Vitae came, and there was an explosion of opposition among priests, college professors who are Catholic, and the hierarchies, both domestic and foreign. And yet, well, wait a minute, we're still charitable. So I was noticing, and one of the bishops who had responded this week to J.D. Vance's advocacy of the Trump initiatives, well, we get government money, but we give it charitably. Well, that is an oxymoron or a misrepresentation, because governments do not love, governments rule. They boss you around. We voluntarily give because charity is the highest of virtues. Government can't love, and no government, no organization that gets 80% of its funding from the government is a non-governmental association. There are so many contradictions in this ideology that they're trying to hold together this week, right now. They're losing it. They are losing a grip because they realize that mercy and dignity are not at stake here. No, policy is. And that policy is one that good Catholics can embrace, even if it opposes the official but non-binding, non-magisterial opinion of a bunch of guys at the U.S. Catholic Conference staff in Washington.
Dr. Manion, can I hone in on that year? You said 1967 with LBJ. What exactly was it in that year that there was some sort of a deal where he basically, the Johnson Amendment, was that 67? And where it was changed such that they could receive government grants?
That's correct. The LBJ's Great Society was passed in bills in 64 and 65, and it opened up all of what we know today as health, education, and welfare funding by the federal government. A couple of points there, but with regard to that 67, on Planned Parenthood's own site, we have their stipulation. Now, of course, in 1967, every state in the Union had laws against abortion. Just matter of fact. And it was, and believe me, my father having taught con law for 30 years, and as an aside, Eisenhower offered him a seat on the Supreme Court in 1954 if he just shut up about an amendment that he was supporting in the Senate. And Dad said no. And so William Brennan, other Catholic, Democrat, Irish, got the seat. But Dad used to tell his law students, you take the first bribe, you may as well take the rest.
Yep.
And so I grew up on a farm in Indiana instead of Bethesda, Maryland. So thanks, Dad, for that one. But the courts became politicized. And they increasingly insisted, the Warren Court, especially in 1958, said, the Constitution is what we say it is. Now, Marbury versus Madison said that pretty much, but Warren put it in print. And then they passed Roe v. Wade. And then they'd already banned the Bible, banned prayer, and banned the 10 Commandments. And what are you going to do with a generation who's never heard of those three realities? They're going to, the sexual revolution is going to collapse the culture. The bishops had abandoned the teaching of the family and children. And it's interesting to fast forward to December 2023, where Cardinal Dolan said, look, we need the immigrants. We respect their dignity, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't a round table in the archdiocese. We have no births. We have no converts. And the immigrants are New York's answer to the depletion of people in the pews. We don't have empty pews. But listen to what he said. We have no births. Who has been preaching? Have babies.
Yeah.
Sociologists, maybe. Few priests here and there. Maybe a bishop. And then, okay, there's no births and there are no converts. Well, duh, we noticed. And meanwhile, 50 million Catholics have left the pews since 1965. So we need the immigrants. Well, he's throwing up his hands, or Paul, I'm sorry, as Pat Buchanan once said, it's enough to make you throw up.
Yeah, right. I want to kind of flip the tables just a little bit, because on the one hand, okay, if we're bishops, if we're Catholics, and we're looking at this great big pot of money that's being offered to faith-based organizations, and we're looking at that, billions of dollars and saying, gosh, our charitable organizations could really stand to use, a few extra couple of $1 million or whatever it was at the time. And so from a Catholic perspective, it makes sense. Okay, why don't we go ahead and ask the government if we could have some of that money so that we can, boost our services and really increase our reach. And if I'm a bishop, I might even think, if we increased our charitable reach, well, then our outreach to the community and the converts would also increase, if I'm a bishop and I'm thinking that way. On the other hand, how does it serve the government to hand a paycheck to the bishops and to get them addicted to federal money? From a political standpoint, I'm the politician and I'm saying I want to create a way to give money to these charities. What is the politician thinking?
Well, in politics, it's always tit for tat.
Mm-hmm.
And the bishops might not think that way, but
Right.
politicians do. And where you have that desire, oh, gee, if we can get more money. And there's a passage that I cite in the book of an early Catholic Charities USA, founded in 1910. Officials saying, it was during the Roosevelt period. It's just too much for us to do. We're all dirt poor and we don't have enough. And the government does have these welfare programs, so we're supporting them. They weren't getting paid yet.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found out in the 60s was that when you get paid, now remember, there's still a distinction. You cannot preach. You cannot say grace before meals. I've had these conversations with folks in the NGOs here and abroad. But I asked, well, can you evangelize? Can you talk about Jesus? No, we don't proselytize. We evangelize. They see what we're doing and what the Jews are doing and what the Lutherans are doing and what the seculars are doing. So very quickly, if you will, the vibrancy of the faith is drained slowly, quickly, depending. But then you have another issue, and that is, again, the money. The Catholic NGOs, the agencies, discovered that, we're part of a whole crew of recipients, of grantees. Many of them are, unfortunately, pro-abortion, but we're in the same bill from the Appropriations Committee, and we're all in this together. So they formed support groups that were called circles of protection. We're all circling together, arm in arm, to go to the federal trough and make sure we get full funding. Now they're going to do with theirs what they do, and that includes abortion. But we don't touch that. No, and one fellow complained to me and said, in some of these contracts, we can't be the general contractor, and that takes away our 20% of overhead. When those guys are talking about money in and money out, they forget exactly what's being done with the money when it goes out.
Right.
And the accountants say it foots. That is, this equals this, and so it's clearly legal. Well, where's it going? And that's what we're discovering now. And people are waving these long lists on the floor of the House, and it is a beautiful sight to see. I mean, I've been waiting a long time for this, only because ever since the bishops in Latin America told me in the 70s and 80s that we're just on the wrong road. And in the book, I tell a little story about how I discovered that the USCB knew and didn't want anybody else to know, period.
As the drug dealers say, the first one's free.
Going in from a Catholic point of view, okay, great. So you guys mentioned, fine, the politician gives a government grant, he's always thinking tit for tat. Okay, great. Well, can you just be devil's advocate and say, yeah, there's nothing wrong with us receiving the grants, although
Mhm.
you may be wanting the tit for tat, but we're not going to play the game.
Mhm.
So is there a valid case to be made? Or like, are they evil in se? Are government grants evil in se? A lot of nonprofits out there, good nonprofits took money during the the COVID payouts, right, to sustain their institutions. But is that in se bad? And if it's not in se, I mean, is there at least could you dance with the devil, so to speak? What's your opinion on that, Dr. Manion?
Well, things aren't evil; people are. So, to have a government grant offered you is when you need money to do good things, is on the face of it a very attractive option. However, a couple of things arise. First of all, the big donor always gets the biggest attention. And that's a problem. It's just a reality in any financial operation. How's your profit margin? Well, it's real weak over here, but we got a really strong seller over here. And in 18 months, we're going to get double on that. And it's going to make up for the losses we're taking over here on the other side. That's terrific. Well, what happens when you've got some problems? Let's say the scandals. I mean, there are 23 states attorneys general that are investigating the scandals even today. Mm-hmm. And Cardinal Christopher Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio, in October of 23, said that you're still fighting this. And of course, last October, 3 or 4 billion in California alone goes to settlements. Yeah. And suddenly people are saying that adds up to a lot of money, but there's something missing. One of my former students, brilliant kid, is representing the Catholic Conference in a lawsuit in front of the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. I know his law firm well. They're the most expensive law firm in Washington. His law firm's billing doesn't show up on those settlements. It's what we pay the opponent's lawyers, what we pay their clients. We don't say, Cardinal Mahoney doesn't tell us that it cost him, in my view, at least $1 billion to stay out of jail. I'm sorry, Cardinal, Your Eminence, to stay off the stand. And then Archbishop Gomez says, you are out. You're not going to practice any public
ministry.
And Mahoney says, well, I'm a cardinal. And he prances off to 2013 and elects Pope Francis, texting every day about how wonderful Rome is and how happy he is. So when you have a large amount of money, you are going to do things to make sure that your grantor doesn't feel any weakness in his ardor for your cause. And secondly, let's face it, I was very disappointed when our bishops in Virginia refused to open the doors during the lockdowns. But the Attorney General of Virginia, Mark Herring, had the file of every priest in the state in his office, the personal file that has every letter of complaint. This guy wrote a tirade because he didn't like my sermon about Humane Vitae. That's in the file. Those files are thick and they are very confidential. So our bishops thought the better and didn't open the churches. And for 4 years, we recall the Trump 45 years, the bishops were upset. He was cutting back their money seriously by 50%. 4 years of silence. Catholic Joe Biden, 4 years of silence from our beloved shepherds. Now, mind you, that whatever was in their hearts is their business. But on the record, there was silence. And immediately, Trump is inaugurated, and we hear from our bishops again. It reminds me of that old Irish song, "Now we're up and live again because we are the Irish." It's almost laughable. I love them. I love them. Yeah. I would hate to be a bishop. But they, and by the way, just one last thing about those fees. In 2002, 111 were shown in the 6-page report, special report in the Dallas Morning News of having covered up, transferred, and other. 2/3 of those bishops, not one quit. And they banded, they hung together. They didn't want to hang separately. And if they had hung separately, who would have been the target for those lawsuits? Not the diocese anymore, the individual bishop. No, they stayed in their chanceries and built a big wall around them.
Sounds like they had their own circle of protection.
And it's disappointing to the laity. And millions have left because of this.
Sure. It's actually your mention of the file that the Attorney General of Virginia had on the sex abuse cases here, just in the state of Virginia. If you expand that to the files that various politicians have on all these bishops and all of their priests and the reports and the complaints, and how many times has a politician who has had his greases, his skids greased with a little bit of extra palm money between the bishops and the politicians and whatnot. It seems to me that there might be some kind of quid pro quo going on just in regard to who knows what about whom, if you catch my drift.
Well, my dad said, don't take the first bribe.
Right.
When they went after me when my brother was confirmed to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, Joe Biden led the battle. He was a gentleman when we won by 1 vote. But his sidekick was my dear friend from Notre Dame in my class, Ralph Neese, the most effective pro-abortion advocate in the 1980s and 90s in Washington. Head of People for the American Way. People kept hiring him as their pro-abortion leader. But I was fine because the FBI knew I was cleared by the head and the Democrat head of the Intelligence Committee. No leak occurred. And the guy who had tried to frame me, along with Ted Kennedy, sidekick, wound up pleading guilty to perjury in another case.
Oh, wow.
So that doesn't happen anymore, fellas. God took care of me. And there are a lot of people in jail for being accused falsely of a lot less. And so the pressure is on, of course. Please leave me alone. Let's get along. My dad wouldn't get along, and I guess I'm just a chip off the old block. That's why I go to the bishops and plead, please. I think this book does not have conclusions as to what is to be done. That's Lenin. We need to do that, and I've got a couple of ideas, but in the meantime, the obvious is, what would happen if you stopped taking federal money? Well, we'd kind of have to regroup and focus our efforts somewhere else. Well, how about Catholic charity instead of government charity, which is an oxymoron? But we're talking about tens of thousands of employees and all the rest. Well, keep that going, give it another name, hand it off to a secular organization, which you are not yet. Hand it off and come back to us. Bishops, come home.
Yes.
And not to Washington, D.C.'s USCCB headquarters, but as Pope Benedict spelled out, no, you run the charities at your diocese. Come
or
home.
even to have an oversight, right? Part of the reason they're able to, it's hard to track all these millions of dollars is because in this country, right, 501c3s, when they're classified as churches, do not have to publish their 990s, which every other nonprofit has to do every May 15th. So it's a blessing and a curse because it allows for misuse of funds, right? And I think we see that most played out right now. I mean, if you're just joining us and watching this and you're wondering why, we have Dr. Manion here, Michael, we're all talking about this book, Charity for Sale, the origins of the Bishops' Conference, and why is this pertinent today? Because today, right now, the number one issue talked about in America right now is the immigration invasion right now. And we're all Catholic here, okay? And the reality is, as Michael talked, and I talked about last show, is the Catholic Church is at the center of the immigration debate. I mean, literally, before stepping on the show, Chris, I'm going to read this to you. I mean, this is the head of this animal that's we've created. The Diocese of San Diego, in collaboration with the San Diego Organizing Project, whatever that is, invite all the
grantee.
Okay, invite all the faithful to stand up for a pro-life service. No.
Yeah.
Okay. It's stand with our immigrant brothers and sisters. So February 9th at 2 p.m. a prayer service with Cardinal McElroy, and who will be the primate of DC, and auxiliary bishops, right? And then they're going to have a multi-faith prayer procession to what? Dodger Stadium to protest the nuns making the stink. Oh no, they're not going to do that. But they're going to have a prayer vigil at the federal building. No flags, religious symbols are encouraged. Clergy and altar servers, please use, get this, liturgical vestments. This is a quasi-liturgy. Now, what are they doing? You're all seeing this, the TV screens about these riots, people waving Mexican flags or whatever it is to protest and shut down civil life and ultimately protect some of these criminals. Why is the Catholic Church getting so strongly involved there? But it looks the other way, as Bishop Strickland wrote the letter recently and just nailed it and said, so little of money there. Michael, you said it, right? No, we've had no pro-life national collection in the history of the conference.
Right.
Okay. So isn't that just like a case in point, Dr. Manion, of this prayer rally, with this liturgical prayer rally? It kind of points to everything you put out in the book.
Well, remember when we talked over a year ago, how did we get here? And the book explains step by step, because it wasn't a big leap. Yes, there were outside temptations, FDR's money, welfare in general. Oh, well, this is wonderful. We need all these programs. Now, that is a permissible political opinion, which Catholics can have, embrace, or dispute. That's what Catholics do all the time. You still go to communion if you disagree with your bishops on politics. But once the welfare programs were applauded, then the money became available to the church to join in with the LBJ expansion. So there was another temptation that sadly was successful. You can see, because of the reaction to Humane Vitae, which would have required that the church stand up to what was admittedly a torrential flow of the sexual revolution. But instead, they got carried away by the tsunami, and just a side product was the scandals. Because sexual abuse, I mean, how are you going to stand up and preach on Humane Vitae if you believe in homosexual rights? I mean, these guys all went to theology 101, and they know what a contradiction is, and they don't want to be a walking contradiction, which they would be if, on the one hand, they either, as Father Mankowski said, half of the guys in my seminary class were homosexual. Well, so you have to either lay low, as he did, Father Minkowski did, and they still farmed him out. They did the same to our friends, the Jesuits in California, whom I won't name because they are friends. Don't want to get them involved. But this happens a lot to good men. And of course, when Al Regnery published Goodbye, Good Men, about the number of good men who have left, and most of them who were chased out by the cabals, get married because they're naturally fathers and they're willing to embrace the sacrifice of giving up fatherhood with a family to a higher calling. They see it that way. If you don't see it that way, then yes, take the money and go out there and wait. Well, what do we do to fill the vacuum left by all the humane vitae issues? Family, children, the defense of the purity and dignity. Talk about dignity. Well, we fill that vacuum with social justice, Bernardin style. And that's what they've done up to this day. And what we're watching at this very moment is the collision. The collision, because when the scandals happened, the Father Richard Newhouse report in 2003, the scandals happened in 2002, and the bishop said, we are not going to be apologizing for this all our lives. We need something new. And that was immigration. And in January 2003, they made a deal with the Latin American bishops that essentially said that America should take all the immigrants that want to come here. And that's where they have been ever since.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the end of the program, but before we finish, I want to end, at least on my side, I have a statement here that was written by Pope Benedict in 2012. It was at the end of 2012. It says, motu proprio on the service of charity. And he gives a prescription for how these bishops are supposed to be approaching the reception of funds and the disbursement of funds, including salaries. And one of the things that we've seen are the obscene salaries that are being paid to a lot of these Catholic charity CEOs. You point out, when they take government money, they're not an industry, they're not producing a product, so they're not making sales, but they are applying for grants, and they're getting these massive grants from the federal government to the tune of billions of dollars. So the CEOs are making $500,000 a year, plus the CEO of Catholic Relief Services makes $640,000 a year in salary plus benefits. But when you read the motu proprio on the service of charity, which, by the way, was never abrogated, it's still the law of the church. This is what it says. The diocesan bishop is to ensure that charitable agencies dependent upon him do not receive financial support from groups or institutions that pursue ends contrary to the church's teaching. Full stop. Right there would take out USAID, PEPFAR, the Global Fund, and a whole host of other agencies that are predicated on population control. But it goes on. It says, similarly, lest scandal be given to the faithful, the diocesan bishop is to ensure that these charitable agencies do not accept contributions for initiatives whose ends or the means used to pursue them are not in conformity with the church's teaching. That would eliminate a whole bunch of the programs that Catholic Relief Services has received funding for to implement. And here's what it says about salaries. In a particular way, the bishop is to see that the management of initiatives dependent upon him offers a testimony of Christian simplicity of life. To this end, he will ensure that salaries and operational expenses, while respecting the demands of justice and a necessary level of professionalism, are in due proportion to analogous expenses of his diocesan curia. Right there would eliminate these exorbitant salaries that we've been seeing in Catholic charities and all these other charitable organizations that are receiving government grants. It seems to me that we already have the solution. It's just being ignored.
Gentlemen, I await the day when the bold Bishop is willing to step forward. Right now, I think that there's almost what the Germans would call a Pflichtsache, a binding requirement that they stick together. The two issues that they have really stuck together on are racism. They're still beating that drum, DEI and all the rest, on the one hand, and immigration. And when they overlap, as Cardinal Dolan says, you congressmen who want to know what we're doing with our money are bigots.
Yeah.
Says it twice. And that's sad because he is a good man. He's pro-life. And so is Archbishop Gomez. But Archbishop Gomez in 2012 threw up his hands and said, look, the next generation, the next America is going to be Hispanic. Because, as Chuck Schumer agrees, well, gee, Americans aren't having children. So I guess, including Catholics, by the way. So I guess we just need to have these 10, he says 10, 20, however many million, make them citizens to make up for those empty cradles. Imagine they are, I know that Cardinal Dolan knows Schumer well. They're both from New York. I know he doesn't approve of Schumer's means of emptying the cradles. But the cradles are empty. And as he says, even in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And we're just going to have to pray our way out of this, fellas.
Pray our way out of this. And also, I guess this is the importance of the political sphere. I mean, look at what, thank God, Catholics responded 58 to 40% voting for President Trump in this past election. And look what a non-Catholic right now is doing by challenging the narrative about these government grants. I mean, change is possible, and to a degree. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're battling a snake here, but it's possible. We got to keep advocating for this. Dr. Mann, we're definitely going to have you on again on our show. I mean, you're just a wealth of information, and then there's so much there. And history is such a great teacher. It kind of wakes us up to understand where we've come from. Mm-hmm. And collectively, Americans, I think, have been looking over the past 50, 60 years, going mm-hmm. back to when the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, really kind of took control of this country in the same way we're looking at the church. So it's important, your testimony, your history, it's a gift. It's really a gift for our generation. We're grateful, so grateful that you wrote this book.
Well, I'm grateful to you guys for cracking the whip too.
It's cracking the whip. We're on a mission. We're on a warpath, the true warpath. And I think we should end, prior to the show here, I noticed how you said, you were saying you're talking to your wife, and you ended it off with a Hail Mary. And I thought that was amazing. It reminded me of my own parents used to do the same. They would end with Our Father. And I think that's the key. You're a big fan of Father Peyton. You knew Father Peyton, and he said so often that the family that prays together, your dad did, family that prays together stays together. And that's how we're going to do it. We're going to lead with prayer. That's what Catholics for Catholics is all about, is getting behind frontline warriors like yourself who are talking about these issues. And we're going to lead with prayer, because prayer is how we're going to change, whether it's Dodger Stadium, whether it's 1,800 mass cards that we sent to Mar-a-Lago to get Trump over the finish line alive, or else, right? So sure. It's I think we should obviously end with a Hail Mary, specifically pray for our bishops. I mean, Judas, he gave over charity itself on the night of Holy Thursday, right? And in a similar way, our bishops have given over charity, through their acceptance of all these funds. So we need to pray for them. Could you lead us in the Hail Mary, Dr. Manion?
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary,
Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen. Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us. Again, we're going to have you on next time. I know the audience is going to want to hear from you. This is important. We'll be sending this video along to a lot of people, congressmen, VIPs, influencers, because they need to hear what's going on. And they don't understand why these, Catholic Church is just doing these prayer vigils right now to support these illegal immigrants, right? So a lot to be said here. And we're grateful for your testimony, and Let's keep up the great work. We will see you
Amen.
next time. Catholic Champion, same time, same place. God bless and fight on.
Amen.